about telescopes the whole time. Are you being our note taker again?
Sandy is gonna watch the video and take notes.
Okay.
So I will track the motions instead of.
Hi, Sandy. Thank you for that. All right, so first up then will be approval of our agenda. Take that by consensus if anyone doesn't have changes. Okay, hearing none, we'll approve our agenda as presented. Then we have our minutes from the September 1st meeting. For those watching online, this one was held at a remote location that didn't have cameras set up for us, so we don't have recording of that one. But are there any changes needed to our minutes? Or I suppose I'll take a motion and second for it as well.
I'll move approval.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion from Bob and a second from Cecily. They were both here. Any corrections to minutes? Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. This will bring us to the public invitation portion of our meeting for people to address the commission on items not on our agenda for the day. I know we have one. Are there any other pre-registered people?
Nope.
Okay, so we have Three Rivers wanted to talk to us about their Parks and Trails factbook for the year. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chairs, Commissioners. I'll be very brief. I've handed out 2 documents. First off, I'm Jonathan Vlaming, Associate Superintendent for Planning and Design, Three Rivers. One is a publication that we try to do every single year. We did miss a year due to the pandemic, but it's the Parks and Trails Factbook. I find it tremendously handy. It's really old school.
I love
But
it.
it's like having a dictionary nearby, even though I never use a dictionary anymore. I use my phone. But this one I do use, and I think you might, I hope you find it interesting and useful as well. The other document is our 2040 vision plan, which was actually approved 2 summers ago by our board. But it gives you an idea on where we want to go over the next 20 years. And I don't want to get into it today, but I would love to have the opportunity to bring over Kelly Grisman, my Director of Planning, and Wendy Wyrick, who is my Director of Outdoor Education. And they could tag team 20-minute presentation for you and take you through the highlights of the plan. There's some really innovative ideas in there and some really interesting directions that I think everybody have some fun taking a look at and learning about. With that, I'd be glad to answer any questions, or I'm done with my presentation.
Thanks, John.
Any questions for Jonathan?
On your map, is that St. Anthony that's standing alone?
Yes, it is. I did include my business card, and I love doing coffee in person. So if any of you ever want to get together for coffee, feel free to give me a call, and I'll meet you wherever. And I'm mobile, I can get around. So that would be great. Thank you very much. Thanks.
All right.
Jonathan, thank you for bringing this over. And I, for one, would like to take you up on your offer to come back and have a conversation with us about your vision.
Thank you.
All right. So then our agenda for the day is just a couple of information items. We don't have any business items this month. So our first one is continuing our discussion of MPOSC's roles. We have Emmett and is Lisa here? Or
Lisa's
just-
not here yet, but
Oh,
I'm completely ready to go.
okay. Go ahead.
Hello, Commissioners. You know Emmett Mullin, Parks Manager for the Parks Unit.
I don't know
This-
if your mic is on, by the way. I can't tell.
I think that it is, and I think it's really amplifying
It's
for
for
the
yeah.
the internet.
That's why I can't tell.
So, yes. The good news today is that I'm not going to go through the same slides that Lisa and I went through at our Cottage Grove Ravine meeting last month. But I did want to continue where we left off, which was we basically walked through the presentation and right as we completed, we sort of needed to exit the building. So we brought this same presentation with, and if there's any questions that you have about any of the presentation or slides, I'm happy to talk about them further. When checking with Tony on this presentation, the one piece of advice that our chair had is the purpose of this presentation is really to help enable commissioners to ask questions and explore the role of the Parks and Open Space Commission. So let's talk about that. So I thought a good place to actually pick up this presentation is I'm jumping through the entire presentation except I'm going right here. So this, we talked about the capital project life cycle, and which begins at Thrive 2040 and walks through the policy plan, park and trail master plans, capital improvement plans, the funding investment, the authorization of funding, grants, and then some sort of performance. Well, I wanted to just sort of take that wheel and break it down, and this is that table that captures what I think of as this commission's work at a very high level. And we actually went through this table with our Office of General Counsel, our lawyers, to just sort of check in and make sure that we were thinking about the role of the Parks and Open Space Commission in a way that met their expectations based on their reading of state statute. And it was actually a really healthy conversation, and we identified 5 areas. So this is sort of the second column there is type of topic, and I just pulled out what I think are those 5 types. The first is, your first role is really informing policy, whether it's Thrive 2040 or Thrive 2050, which Mike and Colin are going to be speaking with us about in just a couple minutes, or the Parks Policy Plan. The second area is around Park and Trail Plan review. The formula disbursement of funding, that's the one super important and sometimes not super exciting part because it's formula funding. You know, it's the agencies get their allocations based on the formula in either statute or the policy plan. The acquisition program, that's another role. The equity grant program, both setting the sort of expectations and priorities for that program, and you're involved in fund decision making or grant decision making. And then I just said in a whole lot more. I think that these are areas that are just generally descriptive of what you do, but there's a lot more associated with it. So this was that table 2 ago, so I just identified those 5 areas. The first is the Regional Development Guide and Policy Plan. The second is Park and Trail Master Planning. These are the formula funding, the Park Acquisition Fund, and then finally the notice, the Competitive Equity Grant Program. So those are the 5 areas. So that's a very rapid way to bring us to what I think is what Tony was hoping is just an opportunity for us to explore the role of this commission and the role of you commissioners. So I'm going to stop there and just invite comments or questions or really anything.
All right. Yes, Cecily.
I have 2 questions. Can you go back a slide, please?
Yeah.
So, formal recommendation and advice. So can we never give a formal recommendation on the ones that say gain input and advice? That's my first question.
Yeah, no, that's a great, you can make a recommendation like with a business item I think that the point that our Office of General Counsel was making is that this is one of the council's advisory committees. So what we are doing is providing advice. So even though it's a recommendation as in the business item, it goes to the Community Development Committee as the consensus recommendation from the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission. So I think it's the council that does the formal recommendation. And
No, the
Or the
council makes the
CDC?
decision.
makes the decision. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
sorry, you're
okay.
making the advisory.
So, okay, thank you. So secondly, and I probably should have pursued this before, I haven't watched the CDC meetings or attended any. So do they see the same exact presentation we see? And then does it get repeated again at the council?
Great question. Oftentimes at the Community Development Committee, and I could ask Councilmember Vento to cover this one, but if it's been a full unanimous recommendation from here, it often goes right to the consent agenda at CDC.
Okay.
I can say that the CDC relies on this group to vet park and trail actions. And when we do make a presentation at CDC, it's often a little bit shorter than what's presented here. It's not often, it's shorter than what's presented here.
So then, it's on their consent, but then how does it go to the full council? Does it go on consent again?
It goes on consent again. I mean, there are some things
It
like,
just seems kind of redundant, being seen twice.
yeah,
But the CDC is a much smaller committee. I can't, right off the top of my head, I can't remember how, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Oh, that's fine, go ahead.
I can't remember how many members we have on CDC. And it's, the council has the final authority, but they rely on you to advise the CDC, and then we advise the council based on that.
Right, and you know, the system seems to work, but I've never seen this before at a city or a county or a state. Having, you know, an advisory body advise to a subset of the governing body rather than the full governing body.
Well,
And maybe that's just the way the statute was written.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if that's the way the statute was written, because I think I was in elementary school when they wrote it, but I could be exaggerating that a lot. But
No,
I will tell you that we have, as Emmett said earlier, we have a number of advisory committees. And given the size of our region and the amount of work that the council as a whole does, those advisory committees are crucial because they provide public input. We have other ways of getting public input, but the advisory committees are really, really crucial.
And your committees also allow for a certain amount of specialization and expertise.
Right.
And the people on CDC have seen park stuff enough to have an idea of how parks works, and the other members of the council might really not. I mean, they have some basics, but they don't have nearly as much time with the park stuff and the land use planning and things like that CDC does.
In preparation for the meetings, you know, we get background materials, so it's not just on the agenda. There are the supporting documents that come along with the agenda and give us a summary, so we're well prepared when it comes up, either at CDC or in the full council itself.
And to your question, Cecily, about which ones have formal recommendation and which don't, some of those staff and I are still going back and forth on because we have some disagreements. The one at the very top is probably the one that really stands out as actually being different, the regional development plan. Because that covers a bunch of different things, not just parks, we have never done a formal recommendation about the entire regional development plan because we don't have a whole lot to say about the
Right.
sewers, and
Right.
we have thoughts on transportation, but they don't listen to us.
Well, we could do
So-
a formal
so-
recommendation on the regional parks segment.
Yeah, although typically the way that the development plan is written, it doesn't even get into that level of specificity about even saying, you know, this is the section about parks. A lot of it's much broader goals. I might be misusing words, but the parks policy plan ends up actually being essentially a chapter in something. I don't remember what that's called and how that's different from, the development plan, if I remember, that's essentially the like Thrive MSP kind of thing that we did before. What is the next thing called?
I think that you're right on it. It's the regional development guide.
Regional
Is the
Guide.
umbrella, and the parks policy plan is actually kind of, you can think of it as a chapter within there,
Yeah,
as with transportation, housing, water resources.
so guide versus plan is what I was getting hung up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's essentially what we do at the step where it gets into specifics about individual things. We pass something that's going to be a chapter. The others is like, it was calling out, like, we want to be better at equity. Well, that applies regardless of whether you're talking about parks or housing or transportation or land use generally. So that kind of thing, it doesn't break up as smoothly. But yeah, some of these other ones, you know, for people who weren't there the last couple of meetings, bonding and legacy are two that we're kind of following up with the general counsel about. And then I also actually want to call your attention, Emmett, this might have actually changed up from a previous draft we had, or we didn't catch it before. On O&M, we do actually have to have a formal action on that, even though we don't do much with it. So that's one that
It's
Yeah,
a report to the legislature,
it's a
right?
formal it's a report to the council. Report to the
Yes,
council, not to the legislature. Yeah, so it's like a formal recommendation to report, but it's not really in the contents of, you know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
yeah, we might have to flesh out some of this wording. Lisa knows what I
Chair
mean.
Ursa, you're right. That actually should say you do have a formal forwarding of a report to the council on the expenses from the previous year from the separate agencies, and that informs the formula, distribution, expenses, et cetera, how much you spent, so that you get reimbursed for. But thank you. I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce myself, Lisa Barajas, Executive Director.
I've been meaning to ask, you've been appearing on some of our paperwork as LisaBeth and introducing yourself as Lisa. Which do you prefer?
You can just call me Lisa.
Okay.
It's fine, thank you.
Yeah, so that one is one that's actually called out in statute as a thing that we have to do. Some of the other stuff is in statute, some of it's not. So where that comes from dictates a bit about what our role is. Other questions on this? Yes, Jeremy?
Parks and Trails master plans, when they get to us, it seems like they're done. Is there a better mechanism for input as commissioners to shape the policy, I guess the way the policies are interpreted to the extent that it affects those plans before they present a final draft to us that we're supposed to push forward with a recommendation for approval? Because it seems like our role is more or less a rubber stamp to just pass it on. So if there are challenges, it would be a lot of work at that final stage to kick something back and say, you know, we don't think that this is the proper interpretation of this policy component. So when I see formal recommendation, I don't know if that's necessarily what we have been doing, at least not the way I perceive it. So I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that.
Could I weigh in on that a little bit?
Sure.
Jeremy, I think over the years, the master plan has been pretty interactive from the commission standpoint, in terms of asking questions, offering advice, playing things back and forth with the implementing agencies. to a point where it's a pretty fluid document, although hard work being done. But the commission has, I think, a pretty active role, and should play a pretty active role before we bless those, because when they come in for funding, that to me is a point where the water has pretty well gone into the dam.
Right.
But in the master planning process, it seems to me it really is our chance to put our thumbprint to make sure that the overall policy feeling and implementation is being there. So that's my point of view.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's true that we've done some of that, but to Jeremy's point, essentially, when we have a master plan on our agenda, we can't edit what's there. We can have some back and forth, but ultimately our vote is either we send it on to CDC or we reject it and send it back to the agency. And that, I think, has happened, but very rarely that we actually send it back to the agency and have them make changes. And as Jeremy said, it's kind of disruptive when we do that, to have to go back and make changes. So they would certainly prefer if it's able to be in a form that we will pass before it comes here. But we don't have a formal way that we do that, but is there maybe an informal way that we could do that?
Yeah, it seems like seems like overkill to kick it back and start the whole thing over again, because we had a problem with one piece.
Chair and commissioners, it's a good point. I think the interesting interplay here is what is contained as the expectations for those plans in the regional parks policy plan is really what the agencies are delivering. The different requirements in the policy plan are what. So as a staff person, it's always my goal to work with the agency so that every plan that comes here really does get approved, and there is a really thorough review process and a lot of back and forth. Your addition of the equity analysis requirement, like that was a new, and now every plan that's coming in has an equity analysis requirement included. That's been, and are you, I think that where you had your thumbprint on that is in the development of that equity analysis requirement. I wanted to, we have turned a couple back since I've been here, 7 years, and it is really disruptive to the agencies and their plans, yet I think that is your job. I mean, that is, if you don't think it meets the expectations, that's what needs to happen. Two other things. One is the activities and facilities list that's in the policy plan right now. The agencies are really talking a lot about that. Like, is that really still reflecting the needs of the population of our region? And some people feel like that really needs to evolve, and I think that a lot of the agencies are already starting to push that envelope. And we have kind of an adaptive process that we created in the policy plan that I'll just tell you I think needs a little bit of work, but it's a process that allows for like consideration of CPAC TACRA or pickleball or other things that we've been discussing, skate parks, so that's something that I'm looking forward to as we get into the regional parks policy plan. So I'll probably just stop there. I don't know, Lisa, if you have any.
No, I would just add, I think just adding on that I think the policy interpretation where we see if there are amongst commissioners, differences in how we interpret policy, that's where we want to highlight those areas and bring them back to our updating of the parks policy plan to make sure that we're clear on that we're agreeing on that as an organization, and then we're also providing clear expectations for implementing agencies too. And that's, especially, I mean, the activities is one, but, as you're looking at plans, it's easy to do to sit back while you're thinking about it and working on a policy plan, but when you're down and looking at the master plans, then you're like, oh yeah, well, maybe we need to clarify this a little bit. And certainly there are some things that as staff we've identified, but as we get, and not to preempt our conversation coming up, but as we get deeper into the update to the regional parks policy plan, those are places where we want to hear from you all as well around, well, where are policies that aren't quite working quite well enough yet, or where you feel like they're still, we need to clarify these or talk about these more. Is this meeting the intent that, we had set out for, or is the intent even clear in the policy plan as we have it drafted today?
Sure. Oh, go ahead.
One other thing that I'll say is this is a great opportunity to take advantage of the fact that we have commissioners representing individual districts. It's tough for me as chair serving as an at-large person trying to keep track of the whole region. I can't possibly do that. But to whatever extent you can, at least keeping an ear to the ground on what kinds of things are they going through. I know I get it just as a resident of Washington County, I'll see promoted Facebook ads. Washington County has started doing when they are developing master plans, they use social media advertising to get things. So I see stuff within my own county of, oh, they're doing a master plan amendment for whatever. So if you see any of that kind of stuff, obviously you can go provide your feedback, but also just reading the stuff so when they're coming here, it's not the first time anyone's seeing it. You can be like, oh yeah, there was this thing. I saw some people made comments about this, some made comments about this. If you have an opportunity to go to an open house or a meeting or something like that to see what was kind of discussed, that's always great. Before anything comes, at least most things, the master plans that come to us are coming with a pre-existing formal passage by the implementing agency's governing board. So whether that's a county board or city council or the special park district board, things like that. So they've already done something that probably included a public hearing at some point. So if you want, you can also go give input at those. And certainly if you see something going through that you're like, I don't know how the rest of MPOSC is gonna feel about this, you can shoot myself or Emmett an email and be like, hey, just know that this is coming and you might wanna think about it before a meeting. Anything you can do to keep track of your own district is certainly helpful in that regard. And I know different people have different time commitments and different abilities to be involved in that, but that's certainly one way that you can balance. I know in our interviews before we appointed anybody, there's a question about how do you balance regional needs and representing your district. Well, this is one of the things that falls into that of just keeping track of what's going on in your district is super helpful. Emmett, you had more?
The only other thing I was gonna say is I really liked when Adam Arvidsson came to the commission once with a plan that he was, struggling with. And he asked for input mid planning process. And I felt like there was some really rich conversation at that. He provided feedback and I haven't opened that option up to the agencies, but I could because some of them may think that would be helpful, so maybe if that makes sense.
I think that would be helpful, at least in my perception of the process, especially if they have questions or challenges with
Things they want.
understanding the policy plan,
Yeah.
recognizing that this is an open vehicle and we can make it a discussion so that we're just not providing comment once they've done all the hard work. 'Cause that would be, I would feel terrible having been a part of one kickback. I don't know how many you've seen in it, but it would be horrible to say, oh, I recognize you've done 2 years of engagement and all this planning work, now go back and do it again. Or make these very specific changes, it's kind of moving the goalposts. And so it'd be nice to have that feedback mid-course if possible.
And the way Adam did that was nice, in that it wasn't just here's what we have, kind of what are your thoughts? He came in here's what we have, maybe you have thoughts on all of it, but here's 3 that we definitely need feedback on, I think. Yeah, that
Really targeted feedback,
that's probably good, especially on some of these ones where they're sort of pushing the envelope, trying something new. A lot of them come through and it's the same kind of thing they've done before, but as we see more new kinds of things, that's probably useful for at least some of our agencies.
Good.
I have a question. Yes. So with all of that, which I totally agree, I want to know, you're not gonna give me your Christmas list now. If you have the perfect commission, what should I do? What do I read? What do you want me to do? What is my homework to come here prepared? I mean, beyond reading the
Yeah.
emails and getting all the papers and checking on my district, I understand that, but it should be like, what are my job here to do as a homework to become be prepared, instead of saying, well, this is my personal opinion that I hear my neighbors maybe say, maybe not, so, yeah.
I'll give you my quick two. One is being connected with the park agencies in your area, like being available to them. Like, I think that's a real role that people can play and sometimes do. And I can help facilitate that if people need help, like connecting. But I think that the implementing agency really benefits, and I think you do too, because you come in knowing even more. The second is the regional parks policy plan is like, that's your areas of greatest influence in my mind, and that's an area where I'd really love for you to bring, your whole self to. And if you have topics that you want discussed, or if there's things you don't like about it, or that you want clarified, because I don't think it's written in a really clear, plain language today. I love it to death, but I think that there's opportunities for improving it, so.
And could I add too?
Yeah.
Of course, get out in the parks in your district.
That's actually probably the most important.
Cecily.
Yeah, Monica, I just wanted to offer something. I live in Washington County, but my district has Washington. I'm part of Anoka County, which I don't know as well. But for Washington County, I've served now on 3 different technical advisory committees because I've gotten to know some of the staff in Washington County. And I go for walks in the park maybe every 2 or 3 months with the parks director. And it's been great because I ask questions, what's going on, what's happening around the county. And again, it's a time thing,
Yeah, but I'm sure it's worth it.
But that way, when, a master plan or amendment comes, I'm somewhat familiar with it. Because I've been to some of the meetings, I've gone online and commented in surveys and things like that. Again, I don't have time to do that for all the districts, but I really try to focus on mine.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I'll reiterate an ask that I've made of staff in the past unsuccessfully, which would be also to have all of the master plans that have been previously approved available in a central location online. So that when we're talking about, a grant or an amendment or an acquisition or whatever, the person who represents that district maybe has had a chance to read through the entire thing at some point in the previous few years. I know the answer I had gotten previously, well, master plans really reside with the agency, so they'd be on agency websites. And some of the agencies do that and some of them don't. And so just having something that would be more universal would be helpful. I know, some of them are not even digital originally. We have them scanned in as something. I remember there was one in particular that I requested, I think when I was still an agency commissioner, and it came back with something from like 1983. It was just a chicken scratch ancient thing. But having somewhere, and I think that'd be kind of nice, even just for the general public to be able to look up, they talk about doing all this planning. What is it? Because we see a business item that summarizes these things. The actual master plans are huge documents that I don't necessarily expect you to read the whole thing, but I'd like to give you the opportunity if you feel like it. So that'd be kind of nice if it's possible.
Mr. Chair, some of them are done on Etch-a-Sketch, so.
I mean, practically stone tablet for a couple.
Good thing we don't live in an earthquake, so.
And in some ways, that's also useful to know of, okay, which ones are the ones that are really out of date? When we're talking about our long-range planning, which agencies have some serious backlog on that and are, how are they working through it? We hear about it from some of their staff, but we don't necessarily have the picture of looking at it. I know DNR actually has the master plans for all of their parks and trails units on a section of their website. I will admit it is hard to find that page on the DNR website, but it does exist. And you can go look up the ones from the 70s and 80s and things and just see what is in there and what's not. And that also gives you a real appreciation for how has master planning changed over the years. You read some of those old ones and it doesn't talk about equity, and sometimes they don't even talk about environmental considerations. They're just like, we're gonna build a trail here and it's gonna go this way. oh, okay. So it kind of, in some ways, makes you feel good about the fact that we're actually making some progress there to see some of those old ones.
Chair, we're working on an inventory of plans right now, and we're also, we have digitized all of our old paper files, so they're not a joy to read, but they are available, and in our flat files, we have this application extender thing. And we can look into how we could share that out.
Certainly, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, one of the things and this is probably more related to our local comprehensive plans and the role and relationship we have with local governments in review of those plans, especially because local governments get sued over their plans a lot. We like to just say, yep, you should go, the source of truth is there, not us, and keep ourselves out of that. But similarly to some of the issues you were raising, Mr. Chair, that they're not always in a format that's actually legible or screen readable, but certainly there are things that we could do and explore Emmett together around where they are available online and then how you can access other ones that maybe are not available online, and talk about how we would keep that up to date as well, so it's not out of date, checking links, etc. So that it is sort of a consolidated place to find them, where we may not actually be housing that plan, but it might be housed on the agency's website itself, but at least a map to get there.
Sure, yeah, if it was a central link, it's like Anoka County, go to Anoka County's website. Carver County, consult council staff or whatever.
Right, and it can even be plan specific, actually, like this
Right.
unit, here are the links to those, here are the ones that you can ask us about.
Visit the microfiche.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
since the pandemic, I know I have really fallen off the process that I used to have, but over time I have tried to stay connected to the commissioners of parks and open spaces in the various areas that I'm assigned. And often that include going to some of the meetings or taking tours of the various parks within their county or so forth. And that was very helpful, and I have sort of gotten out of the habit since the pandemic, and I need to go back into that. But I think to the extent that we can communicate to the implementing agencies our interest and desire to do that, so that we can better represent them. I think that's a good thing, and I'll take it upon myself to get back at that now.
Yeah. I know I frequently get invitations to things like, we want to do a ribbon cutting at something, but it's in the middle of the workday, and so sometimes that's tricky for those of us who aren't retired yet. But if you have the opportunity, certainly that's a great thing to do. One thing I'll mention that came up when I was talking to Emmett on the phone earlier this week, and ties in not just to master plans, but our general roles. We talked about the fact that CDC and the council have a consent agenda, and pretty much every other governing body that I've ever seen does, and we don't. And one of the struggles we've had going back and forth talking with staff about, well, do you want to see this, do you want to see that, is there are a lot of things where we are usually a rubber stamp on them saying, yeah, that looks normal. But I also want the opportunity to say, well, actually, let's talk about that one further. So it's had a lot of tension between, do we want to waste the commission's time looking at everything in depth versus we want to have the opportunity for the commission to give input. So I think I'm going to look into more whether it makes sense for us to possibly have a consent agenda ourselves, or things that come through that we're saying, we're pretty sure that this is all routine and non-controversial, but you have the opportunity, for those who don't know the way a consent agenda works, it comes, it's like, here's 10 things, you can approve them with a single vote. Or if any commissioner objects and says, hey, number 7, can we pull that out as a business item? Then you would just move it out of that into a regular discussion. So you could still take time on it if you want, but you wouldn't have to go through it if it turned out that, yes, it was all totally fine. So that was an idea that we just had a few days ago, and I need to think about further, but also want your feedback if you're like, these are the kinds of things that I'd like to see on a consent agenda, these are the kinds of things that I always want to make sure we have a full discussion on. If you have any of those kinds of thoughts, email me, because we'll probably be trying to figure some of that out as we get into the new year of which things are minor and non-controversial and which aren't, and which are sort of a gray area. It'll be something I'm thinking about. Any other questions on this? Yes, Bob?
Mr. Chair, to your point there, I mean, one of the things that's always looked to me like a consent kind of a thing is the percentages of funding for various funding. Somebody comes in and they want to spend $1 million to acquire and upgrade some of their facilities and so forth. To the extent that it's pretty well baked into the formulas of how those things are funded, I as a commissioner have never felt like I had any particular skill or input, frankly, to say whether I think LCCMR should only be coming in at 500,000 instead of 600,000. I never feel like I have any say, any real knowledge to make that kind of a thing. So to me, it's a consent agenda that staff makes the input, we ratify it, and so that would be one.
Yeah, and that's been a significant part of some of our back and forth on what I was saying with ones that don't have formal recommendations on them. So like the O&M, the legacy, and the bonding, there's essentially two levels of that. One is the how much money does an agency get, and those are largely in legislative formula, and we don't have any control over that. But the other half is, are they spending it on something that is an eligible expense? And that we do have an oversight role of saying, you know, is this a regional park that is part of the system plan? Does it have an approved master plan? That's one of the reasons I'd like to know where are all the master plans, so we can double check, hey, yeah, there is in fact a master plan for that, other than just our memories of passing one 10 years ago. And, you know, are the particular facilities they're building in that consistent with the master plan, that kind of stuff. Usually, that's all very straightforward, and that's what staff review does. So those kinds of funding are normally, yeah, it's kinds of stuff that I would probably see in a consent agenda, but we want to have the opportunity to say, we don't know that what they're proposing in this particular grant actually complies with how they laid it out in their master plan or whatever. So yeah, that's the kind of stuff that I'm thinking about where it's mostly straightforward, but it has the opportunity to maybe want to talk about something.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if I could, I was at a community commission meeting, totally unrelated to Parks and Space, but they were trying out the consent agenda option on their agenda, and there was a lot of confusion around it, and so they kind of turned to me for some advice, and fortunately I have a bit of a background in Robert's Rules of Order, and I said, look folks, when you approve your agenda, you've got the option of pulling things, as you've said. But I said, here's the other thing, try it, if it doesn't work, change it. You know, there's no cement in your decisions, there's no permanence, but give it a try, because, you know, you're dealing with a lot. And that particular evening, somebody, actually, I think the quorum was hoping to get home in time for a baseball game. So, you know, the consent agenda helped them that night. And they saw the advantage of it, so. And I think your point, Commissioner, about, you know, the things that you have control over, I think that's a good example. We have consent agendas, both with our committees as well as with the full council, and it really is advantageous.
Yeah, so like regardless of whether we have authority to make it a formal recommendation or approval or edit or whatever on things, we have 100% control over what we ask Emmett staff to present and how. So we can change that.
Well, often minutes are on consent agendas.
Also true. Yeah, so in terms of permanence, I think the one, I haven't had a chance to go and double check this, but I believe one of the reasons we don't currently do this is I think the items of our agenda are actually spelled out in our commission bylaws.
That's correct.
That's
So,
what Lisa just wrote me.
yeah, so to change that, we'd actually have to change our bylaws, which is why I say look into it in the new year, because I have to actually go do some research and figure out how we would want to do that. But yeah, which things are spelled out where requires a bylaws change first, and then it could be fluid, and yes, minutes would probably usually go in there. Yes, Sue?
And our committees and full council do the minutes separately too. You know, it's.
Do they?
Yeah, I don't think anyone does minutes on consent at the council at least. It's not council practice.
Okay. Yeah, because the other thing that Emmett mentioned is that there's within, I forget which, some other group in the council, they're talking about a definition they currently have that they're updating about things that are like minor updates and wouldn't necessarily go through the same process that they would before. And we were talking about whether there's some things that have come through for us occasionally that might fall under that, where yes, approving the whole master plan might be a normal business item, but when they come back and say, oh, we had a typo on page 6, we don't necessarily need to have a full business item for that again. So similar kind of thing.
The administrative review. Chair, I just am sensitive to, we have to be done by 6 tonight, and I wanna,
Oh, that's right, you said we have an actual thing, okay.
I wanna get to the next item's kind of our, this is an ongoing conversation, so that's what
Yep.
Tony also told me, that this isn't meant to be one and done. This
Yeah, I'm trying to take notes about which things should we follow up
Yeah.
on. That's kind of all we're getting into here. And this, again, is also, especially if you're a newer commissioner, we want to turn this into a bit of a, like, new commissioner onboarding training kind of thing. So if you're saying, what things am I confused about? We want to get that into a presentation we can give new people later. So, we're ready to move on? Yes, okay, thank you. So with that, then, we'll go on to our second information item, which is about the 2050 now Regional Development Guide, which would include updates to the Regional Parks Policy Plan, and we're starting conversations about input on that. We have Emmett and Mike and Colin. Go ahead.
I can begin this one, Chair and Commissioners. This is our next item on the agenda, which is our Regional Development Guide and Regional Parks Policy Plan. It's not quite the kickoff because Mike was here at our August 4th meeting, and we didn't have a quorum at that meeting, but he did go over his current work to develop a vision, values, and goals for this effort. And Mike is one of the busier people at the council, and he has been moving around with different groups and collecting a lot. So things have evolved. And so the thing I want to leave you with today, though, is that this process of creating the Regional Development Guide and updating our Regional Parks Policy Plan is just beginning. This is something that's going to go from now till really 2025. So we are beginning today, and I know you took a survey, so thanks to all of you who did that. But we're going to be doing 3 things today. One is we want to continue to provide input on the Regional Development Guide. We want to get into the Regional Parks Policy Plan. We want to talk about what we heard. It's a really interesting kind of juxtaposition because it's both what you folks have said is important, the MPOSC commissioners, and we gave the exact same survey to our regional park implementing agencies, and they shared what they think was important. And then most importantly, we want to have a discussion. We want to hear from you. So that's my setup. Mike.
Thanks, Emmett. Good afternoon, commissioners. Good to see you again, and council member. I'm Mike Larson. I'm a planning analyst in the local planning assistance group in Community Development Division. And as I explained in August, I'm helping to manage the values, vision, and goals process for the 2050 Regional Development Guide. And I'm obviously one of a cast of many that are participating in this process. So I'm going to go rather quickly, assuming you've had a chance to at least look at some of these slides briefly, and the fact that we had do a little review from what we discussed last time. So just this slide is just give you a kind of a high level timeline of the development process for the Regional Development Guide. And you touched upon this a little bit, the 2050 Regional Development Guide, like Thrive, MSP 2040, provides the overall guidance for the growth and orderly and economical development of the region. And then there are 4, I think you used the term chapters, sometimes I refer to as constituent plans, the 3 regional system plans where the council has the most authority, and those are the transportation, water resources, and regional parks policy plan, and a 4th housing policy plan. Those are a coordinated process. With the adoption of the next regional development guide anticipated at the end of 2024 or early 2025, and then there would be a release of system statements later in the year, and that's basically a distillation of regional policies to provide guidance for local communities on the development of their next comprehensive plan, which will include regional park system plan elements for each of the communities. And that will be, that release will be, like I said, in 2015, and then comprehensive plan updates will be due by the end of 2028. So a number of things are being considered that will influence the articulation of values and vision for the region. They include the comprehensive plans that cities have done most recently, regional research on and emerging issues for consideration, themes from council and advisory groups such as this one, policy plan needs and reflection, what we call the effectiveness or the efficacy of policy planning, and does it provide enough clear direction or prioritization, for example, for the region and its partners in the work. In addition, of course, continuous outreach and engagement. So a number of subject matter expertise are being applied to this process, including economic forecasting for the region, how much the region might grow because of its economic conditions, land use and development that might occur, transportation, various water resources from sewer to water supply, and surface water management, regional parks, housing, equity and system change, and scenario planning. And obviously, as we discussed last week, there's an interrelationship among all of these expertise. Outreach to and engagement with the region's partner organizations and
Mike,
stakeholders.
excuse me for a minute.
Yeah, sure.
Scenario planning, what are you thinking?
What scenario planning is, it's involving looking at a couple of different possibilities for the future. Whether, for example, whether or not the region might grow more or less, and what that might mean, say, for the regional park system and its development and its transportation and transit system development. Another important dimension that we're looking at is whether or not growth might happen in a more dispersed manner or in a more concentrated manner. More recently, we've seen lots of higher density multifamily development in downtown Minneapolis, a lot of the redevelopment in developed areas. In the 80s and 90s, we saw a lot of suburban level of development, so we're considering what the patterns of development in the future might be, and looking at the various dimensions of what the impacts might be under each of those scenarios, like impact on waters, the vulnerability of the water supply, for example, and vulnerability of our groundwater system, the potential role of cost effectiveness of transit in a region, various dimensions that will assist us with policy development and programming, perhaps making course corrections if our expectations for the future aren't quite what is materializing. So it's kind of lengthy response there, but I thought it was warranted. Oh, yeah.
I think I saw
I think she
Sue
raised
first.
her hand first.
Yes,
Oh, go ahead.
but she's gonna defer to you anyway.
Oh, thank you. I don't know if this question is for you or for Colin later, but in the category of equity, park agencies around the country are starting to have land acknowledgement statements. And I don't know if the Met Council does, but I'm also seeing park agencies do repatriation and renaming of facilities, like Lake Calhoun is one example. So would that sort of conversation be appropriate in this kind of a regional plan?
Chair, Commissioner, I think it's appropriate to bring up whatever issue you think is important for the region. I certainly have heard conversations about land acknowledgement. No, specifically, I've not about repatriation, certainly renaming. I think these are, we are working on various definitions of what equity might mean to the region, and what high-level goals and how that might be expressed. And I certainly think that would have a special application in terms of the regional park system as a natural resource-based system, often many connections to how land has been used in the stewardship of the land, ownership of land and such. So I don't know. Want to elaborate on that, but yeah.
Yeah, one other thing I'll say is that you're not the first commissioner who's brought up the question of land acknowledgement stuff. Someone else had brought that up in the context of should that be something that's part of our meetings and things like that too. And my response to that initially was that I don't know that I feel comfortable about doing it right. And I think it's important that if we do it, that it's important to do it right. And so one thing that we'd want looked into by someone that's more of an expert on is what are kind of the best practices around that kind of thing, and how can that be done respectfully, understanding that, especially with land acknowledgement, there's lands that often were homes to multiple people, sometimes at different times, sometimes at the same time overlapping, and how do we deal with that kind of thing, I don't have good answers to, but I think certainly opening some of those conversations, I think would be an appropriate thing to fit into our discussion of equity in here. Yeah.
Well, with land acknowledgement, actually, I'm going to the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits Conference next week. And, you know, again, many nonprofits, many public agencies do have a land acknowledgement statement, but it's a statement.
Yeah.
And, you know, it has no teeth. So the conference session I'm going to is basically what's next. You have your statement. Are you going to do anything with it? What does it mean?
So you might become our expert. Because yeah, I
As
didn't
a
want
white person, I'm curious.
Yeah, I don't want it to
You
just be performative, you know?
Right.
Like,
I mean,
what
creating
actually
a
matters?
statement is nice. It's a first step.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
Shall I continue?
Yes, I
Oh, I'm
Yes,
sorry,
yes,
that's
sir.
right, my apologies.
Colin, I'm curious as to what types of resources are available as it relates to the folks within each of these subject matters in terms of grappling with the challenges that the pandemic have kind of laid on us in terms of all of these areas. I think of it immediately with transportation, but I think it has the potential to affect everything.
Yeah, like, do we even have the capacity to come up with a forecast? You're talking about scenario planning, and that's gotta be, one of them is, you know, how much are people gonna work remotely, how much are gonna work downtown, how much are gonna work in an office but in a suburban setting? Do we have any ability to actually forecast that?
Well, and then there's also the talk about a migration, say, from the west coast of Florida. Where are they gonna go? Are they gonna end up coming here? They wanna be near water, 10,000 lakes, you know. There's so much happening right now that it's kind of unprecedented, both COVID-wise and climate-wise. What kind of a challenge does that pose for folks? And I don't expect you to have an answer tonight, but it's something, you know, on the next, as we're going through this, I think it's something to think about in terms of looking for those resources.
Chair and Councilmember, if I just may briefly respond that, yes, this is something that the staff has discussed as well. I think the pandemic has had profound impacts on society, as have other forces. And so the ability to forecast, I think, has become more volatile and difficult. And I think that's why scenario planning can be helpful. That if we, you know, in terms of how we might adapt and respond to the scenarios other than the most likely one. So. Okay, so this might help answer your question previously about issues like land acknowledgement. Just thinking more broadly about the outreach and engagement that we've been doing is obviously a very important, not only part of this sort of beginning part of the process, but developing those relationships and developing that engagement infrastructure going forward as we get deeper into regional policy, this including the Regional Parks Policy Plan. So we've been being engaged primarily with the groups that you see on the left, such as MPOSC and other standing bodies. And so we have only started to engage other groups, and we have yet to engage tribal nations and communities in a formal way, but have been discussing the approach and doing it in a respectful way, doing it in an efficient way, and I believe we will be able to share insights with you of how we might reflect the insights and perspectives and values of those communities as part of the region. So stay tuned on for that, and we will be asking various other stakeholders through the region what their level of interest is for participating in these various planning efforts and what might work for them, and work to develop a plan to engage them in a meaningful way. And if you have ideas and insights about any of that, we would certainly welcome that. So this very colorful graphic here just meant to kind of visually, hopefully I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but it might be helpful for you going forward to think about how we're doing this, kind of going from what's going on right now, what are our emerging changes and challenges, and how that reflects how we might think of this in terms of our values, our collective values as a region and what our vision might be, and then to start parsing it in terms of, where do we have specific issues related to land use, housing, park specific, and how they, and above that, kind of how these relate to each other. And last time we talked about, and I think with the implementing agency, we talked about the economic value of the regional park system for the region as one of potential many areas to explore in the regional development guide. So this lovely graphic that I keep recycling is just intended to emphasize that as we work together to articulate a vision for the region that we will share with the council and work within the council, it's not meant to be set in stone, but to provide a high level of guidance for the planning to follow. And as we get additional insights and perspectives through more detailed plan and policy development, it could help refine sort of the overall vision statement. So it was a little backward, cyclical, little iterative process going on there. Just some of the themes that we've had collected through surveys, discussions. You see a lot around words around being effective as organizations, having empathy for people, leadership, accountability, and innovation. And these are values that we may hold as members of organizations in our work. In terms of values that emerge that relate to kind of more aspiration for the region as a whole, or the communities that we serve, we hear lots of words about equity, of course, in various ways that we might think about equity, like justice and fairness, but also stewardship of the environment, sustainability, and such. And so lots of different ideas, but they kind of categorize themselves. You start to see some people like some consensus on some of these things. So in terms of articulating regional vision, these are some sort of high-level kind of statements that reflect some of the things we've been hearing. Certainly not the only way that we might articulate this, but we hear about the elimination of racial inequities, creating a safe and welcoming region, the importance of housing affordability, robust economy, and a restored or enhanced natural environment. And then we also hear a lot about specific investments that work towards these ends, that prioritize these things. So last time we asked you, had a little discussion about how the regional park system relates to some of those themes, about the preservation and restoration of natural systems, creating a welcoming region, particular investments in sustainability in the system, creating a vibrancy and sense of community, a region that's interconnected and navigable, and the region's economic growth. Some of the things that we heard from you is that I just put at the top because I think that had a lot of enthusiasm. Implementing agencies should be involved early in a collaborative process because they are closely connected. They're owners, they're partners in the system, and they're close to, Benji talked about the master planning process, and so they have intimate knowledge of the park system. The park system could be a driver of regional economic growth. Transportation and its relationship to regional parks is an issue. the importance of outreach and education on sustainability, kind of a bigger picture on environmental resources helping shape regional policies, so not just an environmentally based regional park system, but environmentally based regional policy. And keep the language simple and strong so that we know what we're talking about and we understand our priorities, that kind of thing. So that's really all I have, and I just want to hear the highlights from the discussion. You had done a survey online, and Colin's going to address that, and we're going to hear more about that, kind of keep the momentum going. But anything that I may have missed in recapping your previous?
Mike?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, excuse me.
Go ahead, Bob.
One of the things, you've got economic forecast up there.
Yeah.
It seems to me that sociological forecast is a big play here, especially as it relates to the economics and also to our park sensitivities as we plan for addressing the needs of new populations coming into our area. So I just think about places like the University of Minnesota. The state must have in the Human Resources Department Wilder River Foundations. Some of those players who are thinking about this kind of stuff might be resources you'd like to consider.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Commissioner, absolutely, I appreciate the suggestion. You know, certainly our region will be much more diverse in the future than it is today, and I think one of the things I think that we failed to mention was that we are going to be partnering with youth serving organizations to develop a youth cohort to participate in the planning process, regional planning process. And we certainly have in mind the diversity of those organizations and those people who might represent the diversity of the region in the future. So, and what the emerging needs and interests and barriers and opportunities that might exist with not just parks, but with other regional issues as well.
And one thing I'd say, especially with the youth, but also some of these other groups that we've talked about doing outreach to, we've historically kind of done public engagement to community groups as we're working on a particular plan, whether it be our park policy plan or a master plan in DHC, and reaching out to them during that, and it's kind of a short-term thing. I would like to see if there's some way of doing it more of a continuous long-term back and forth with some of these groups. I don't know what that would look like exactly, but like we had a little visit from that youth council from the Mississippi River group a little while ago, and they're new, but is that something that we could have a maintained relationship where we're not trying to reach out to them to ask about just a specific thing, but just back and forth all the time, over time, and have kind of relationships with those people more so like they know us and we know them long term better.
So Mr. Chair, we have considered some of that. One of the things I think we'd like to do is this is a little bit of a trial to see what works. One of our assumptions is that it may be difficult to maintain the same individuals over an extended period of time because they're young and they may be, but to establish a continuity among the organizations that we work with, so there's a consistent participation from organizations and an understanding of what the role is, it might entail, and expectations and such.
And don't know if you were here at the time in this meeting when I brought that up, but when we did have that youth council here, the other thought I brought up is, obviously the struggle with young people is that they don't stay young forever. So they might be involved in a youth group of some sort that we're dealing with this year, and then they might go off to college for a few years and then move back. And how can we follow up and maybe do something where those same individuals could also be moved into other roles of like, hey, now that you're an adult and back, do you want to go apply for your county's parks commission or something like that and get them into some of those positions? So in addition to maintaining the long-term relationship with an organization, we could do some sort of pipelining of individuals, say, hey, can we move from this opportunity to another kind of role in a different group over time, and help figure out, because we kind of have a gap of, sometimes we talk to the people that are teens, early 20s, and then we get a lot of people on commissions that are quite a bit older and we lose that middle gap of the rest of the 20s into 30s, some of us as exceptions to that, but it took some effort to find that age group, and it's not the norm when you go out, especially looking at some of the other boards and commissions elsewhere. There's kind of those two sets and not as much in between. If we can kind of keep it more continuous, that would help. Sue, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A week ago, the Friends of the Mississippi River had their annual fundraiser. And part of the program was presentations by both some of the youth who were here that night, as well as some interns that they've been working with, young interns. And, the council has interns working. There's a lot of potential with the intern level, and those tend to be more kind of the collegiate level, or they're the ones who it might be easier to develop a long-term relationship with.
Yeah.
But I think the involvement of both of them is excellent. And one of the goals at FMR was, they won't be around here forever, but it'll help create the passion. And hopefully that will be a good pandemic, a good thing to be contagious. It can help spread that passion.
Well, Mr. Chair, I would just say in conclusion, I think by establishing this youth court, we are investing in the future relationships and the future of the regions.
I'm going to continue with it.
Let's do it. All right, thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, Councilmember Bento. Good to see you. I think you guys remember me. I'm here today to officially kick off the Regional Parks Policy Plan Update process, part of the Regional Development Guide process. It really is a part of the Regional Development Guide, but we also often think about it and talk about it as a separate entity as well. We sort of think of them together and separate. And for a little while here, we'll talk about it as this item here, 130-page document right there. So in this presentation, I'll briefly go through an initial project timeline for that update process and move pretty quickly into the results of that survey that many of you took within the last week or so. So thanks to everybody who participated in that survey effort. If you weren't able, no worries, you can participate today. There's an opportunity for discussion after the results you hear. So that's to come. I should also note that this is not the only opportunity for input. There's going to be a number of opportunities between today and the end of 2024 or thereabouts. So don't worry if you couldn't participate in the survey. There will be more opportunities to come today and beyond. So let's get started with what you see before you. Minnesota law requires that the council conducts a review of the policy plan, the Regional Parks Policy Plan, at least every 4 years. And you might recall, some of you, that the policy plan was last updated in December of 2020. So, add 4 years to that, and you can see the bottom bullet point here. The completion of the policy plan update is expected in December 2024. Or thereabouts. Once again, there's a number of moving parts, and of course the Regional Development Guide will play into that timing as well, but that is our anticipated timeline. As you see in the second bullet point there, the project will involve a comprehensive review of all components of the policy plan and will include significant internal and external engagement. I should note that while this project as a project is just getting started, by no means are we starting from scratch, right? We're able to build off a lot of good work that's been completed over the last several years, including ongoing work. But you've probably heard about the Youth and Parks research, the 2021 Visitor Study, a newly minted Parks and Trails Planners Forum, and regular conversations with you, of course, just to name a few. So, let's keep her going. We've got an initial project timeline here for you. What you can see I've done is layer a few colorful boxes and stars and labels over the timeline that Mike provided. included some regional parks policy plan phases using a project management framework, some terminology you might associate with that kind of work, initiation, planning, execution, and close. Today, we sit at that space which is depicted by the orange star and associated with your favorite acronym, MPOSC. Today's October 6th. A bit of a project overview, and we do know what we're talking about today, that TBD is just a vestige of a draft previously. We're here to talk about issues, regional park system values, vision, and your advice, of course. So thank you for that. The second part I'd like to direct your attention to on this slide is continued engagement of our implementing agency partners. That happens in a variety of ways. Work groups that will likely be developing after the input we're gathering today, that we've gathered last week, that we'll continue to gather with council committees into November and the remainder of this year. But also, of course, very importantly, continued engagement of council committees like MPOSC, like the Community Development Committee or CDC, and then a variety of other stakeholders, targeted engagement of other stakeholders and groups. Tilting towards the end of the slide here or to the right, we also have a statutorily required public comment period. That's typically a 45-day length, and of course a public hearing that is typically overlapping the end of that public comment period. So that's kind of a high-level overview of where we intend to be over the next about 2.5 years or so, 2.25 years. But the main intent with all of this is to remind you once again that we're on the front end of this process. There's still a ways to go, and I wanted to highlight a few of the key stakeholders and partners that we'll be working with as well. This is not meant to be all-inclusive, just sort of a tip of the iceberg kind of view. So moving into the exciting results of the survey that we shared with you recently. We asked you about the issues, topics, and challenges that relate to the policy plan update, and a few other questions around your early thinking on park system values, around vision, and we're also hoping for some advice from you as commissioners to us as council park staff as we kick off this project in earnest. So we'll start with the first question posed, again, was around issues, topics, and challenges. And some of those thoughts included the importance of balancing the amount of built and natural areas in regional parks, and balancing the amount of paved versus unpaved trails in regional parks and trails. Climate change and climate refugees, expanding Americans with Disabilities Act access to include autism spectrum disorder, cultural awareness and understanding, collaboration with public, private, and non-governmental organizations or NGOs regarding programming and public engagement, long-term maintenance and monitoring needs, interest in a process for delisting units if they fail to perform at a regional standard, that this policy plan update process is an opportunity to build relationships and create more connections among implementing agencies, equity, access, linking trails, trail separation lanes, and immigrant-focused facilities were all raised by you and your commissioners in your responses. Now let's take a look at how the implementing agency director group responded to the same question. As you might gather from this slide, they really mentioned the topic of funding quite a bit in their responses in a number of different ways. From a desire for increased, stable, and long-term funding, to more funding for operations and maintenance, and for capital projects and investments. There was also an interest in flexibility on the Parks Acquisition Opportunity Fund, or PAOF timelines, expanding our bonding capacity, and revisiting the formula distribution. Others mentioned an increase in a more equitable allocation of funding, seeking out new sources, and an increased contribution from the state, as well as to ensure legacy fund availability beyond 2034. The other most frequently mentioned items by agencies are those outlined in light blue, so access and equity. Orange, allowable uses and facilities, and a thin purple line that surrounds regional trail network, bridging facilities, climate change, youth, and metrics. Now, the remainder of the items were only mentioned one or two times, but they are certainly worth mentioning here as well. Master plan requirements, we've talked about that a bit tonight already. Metrics, improved transit connections, natural resources planning, cultural resource management, recreation opportunity spectrum, visitor experience model, post-pandemic paradigm shifts, another topic of our discussion tonight, population growth, unique strategies for areas at different stages of development, and to clarify unit typologies. So that was both MPOSC and implementing agencies' response to the first question. Let's move on to the second one. And there'll be an opportunity to talk about all of these questions after we kind of get through the overview here. But the second question posed to you focused on values. So what values do you feel are important to the future of our regional parks and trails system? Two values were mentioned more often than the rest, and those are with the slightly larger outline here, safety and inclusion. But the other responses were, again, really quite intriguing and included, starting with the one or two word responses, welcoming and well-maintained, respecting old ideas while incorporating and valuing new ones, protecting nature, caring for our trees and appreciating the treasure that is our regional parks, opportunities to experience the outdoors solo or with others, sustainable management and capacity considerations as climate change impacts are felt, invasive species challenge maintenance, and use and needs increase for programming. Consideration of the burden to future commissioners and agencies related to what might be unmanageable and unwieldy maintenance loads. And finally, some expansion on the notion of inclusion, that regional parks and trails are open for all, regardless of age, ability, race, ethnicity, religion, income, and so on. Implementing agency partners responded to the same question, and you can see those responses here. Again, in the center of the slide, you can see a large sphere with equity in the center. This was really the most commonly mentioned value by implementing agency partners. The other most frequently mentioned values were access, health, respect, diversity, inclusiveness, and welcoming. And again, these values overlap in a lot of the ways with what your responses included as well. The remainder of the values referenced were mentioned less often, but again, worth verbalizing here, including vibrant, healthy, livable communities, quality of life, clean air and clean water, natural resource focused, healthy native plant communities, stewardship, flexibility, effective communication, sustainable funding, fiscal responsibility, economic impacts, intuitiveness, providing quality and value, and partnerships. I should note that while presenting this to our implementing agency partners last week, one of my colleagues noted that several of these items listed separately here relate to natural resources or the natural environment when you take them together, thereby elevating the perceived importance of these value areas. So that's worth taking into account here as well. But let's move on to question number 3, where we posed a question about a vision for the regional park system, some early thinking around a 2-sentence vision. And I'll have to say, I thought you all came up with some really good ideas that are presented on the screen here. In the interest of time, I'll just give voice to the first 3 and let you read through the remainder as you wish. They're on the screen here. They should be in your agenda packets as well. But from the top, serving all residents and visitors with a wide array of active and passive experiences to build lifelong memories. A safe place to escape daily stress and enjoy the present while learning about our ecosystem. Always protecting the part of the world we live in. And continue the growth and investment in expanding size and scope through acquisition of property, develop new areas of acquisition in a timely manner, increase the level of accessibility for everyone beyond minimum standards. Now, technically that last one is 3 sentences, but we'll let that slide, as the succinct fourth offering is only 1 sentence long, really just a sentence fragment. My happy place.
Okay,
I like
so
that.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
that was mine because I misread and I thought it said 2-word vision. I thought she did.
Okay.
So, true confessions. Thank you.
Yeah,
We don't.
true, true. Okay, thank you for that clarification, Councilmember Bento. Okay, similarly, our implementing agencies took on a similar task to write a 2-sentence vision for the regional park and trail system, or for regional parks and trails. And again, I'll give voice to the first 3, but please feel free to read and consider all of them. They're all quite good in my opinion. Starting from the top, regional parks and trails impact the quality of life for every metro area resident. Parks and trails are equitable spaces for community, creating and maintaining outdoor, engaging, nature-based experiences for today and tomorrow. And a welcoming, well-used, and loved system that is used by all communities to meet critical recreation needs. And finally, on to question number 4. This particular question focused in on any additional comments you might have for council staff, or advice that you might have for council staff as we embark on this process. Some of those comments included consideration of the risks that climate change poses to urban trees, and using regional parks as a positive example and information source for people who want to care for their own resources. The importance of timely development of new acquisitions for providing new areas of use and experience. An expression of appreciation for this important work and for seeking the Commission's input. Some additional underscoring of important topic areas like climate changes and invasive species. An interest in a process for right-sizing the system as regional needs, interest, and use changes. A recognition of capacity building through programming. And a desire to better understand the demographic trends in the decades to come and how demands for outdoor activities may shift as a result of those demographic changes. That sounds similar to a comment that Commissioner Mullin made a little bit earlier. So excellent comments and thoughts here. We'll take a quick look at what our implementing agencies said on the topic as well, and then we'll wrap this part up and open it to discussion. So agencies also offered a great deal of food for thought here, including a question about how the council is bringing the public into the process and an implied desire for transparency, allowing ample time and opportunity for a variety of agency staff to contribute, ensuring that all agencies get a voice and that loud voices don't dominate, an expression of appreciation to council staff for facilitating this important effort, a suggestion, actually the rest are suggestions, to revisit funding formulas to focus on areas that still need to be built out, to reconsider the composition of the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission to be structured like the Transportation Advisory Board, to include agency boards and commissions in the planning process, and finally, a suggestion to develop an engagement process that empowers agencies and overall to have a process that allows adequate time for discussion and shared development of outcomes and agendas. I recognize that was a lot in just a few minutes, so I appreciate you bearing with me for all of that. The input that you and implementing agencies and others have provided and will provide going forward really helps center and ground our collective work over the next 2+ years. So now is the time when I stop talking and we open up the floor to all of you to weigh in on what you heard from your fellow commissioners, what you heard from implementing agency directors, and to add to the conversation. So council staff have the 3 basic questions you see up on the slide here, up on the screen in front of you for you to ponder and discuss in relation to the preliminary input you just heard about. So What resonates? Where are there gaps? And do you have new ideas to share? And with that, I will pass it back to you all and Chair Russo. Thanks.
Okay, that's a lot. Are there any initial things you want to throw out? I anticipated Blake stares, but maybe someone will be brave.
May I say?
Go ahead, Mark.
I think what I found very interesting about it is like it's easy to make a summary and we pretty much can see what is the problem, like climate change, equity, inclusivity in everybody. Like I say in different words, in different ways, but it's basically the same problems that we're having together. So I think that really resonates with me. I wish there was a little more positivity because we always look at the problems, which, well, you were asking for the troubles, so you got them. But it will be nice sometimes to get some positives on it, so that's pretty much my input. I like this study and I appreciate you asking for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. Cecily?
Yeah, it's really interesting, the difference between MPOSC and the implementing agencies. But what I would be curious about is there a difference whether people are in the very urban areas, the suburbs, the exurbs? I mean, I live in Kentucky compared to Minneapolis. For values and perspectives, I don't know if they're the same of what people would want in the regional parks plan.
It's a great point and a great question, something that others have brought up as well.
Like, what would my council say?
Anyone else?
Could I just comment on that?
Sure.
Thanks, Cecily, for saying that. And one of the suggestions that we got, I don't remember from who, is to get out and talk to some of the boards from the different agencies and thinking that there really will be a range of things that we'll learn from that. And that's something that I'll just say that I actually am looking forward to doing. So.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Bob.
I would also support Cecily's comments that we may have one vision of equity and things, and yet the councils in the various counties or implementing agencies may not be where we are, and it would be really interesting to get their advice as well. And we may want to do it on a more formal basis as one of our roles, going to the implementing agencies and sitting with their committees, their commissions, and asking these same kind of questions. So that their points of view aren't just represented through our particular bias, but rather we're bringing some data gathering into that. Now, maybe the implementing agencies have done that, but I'm just saying, as I reflect on this, I'm not sure my point of view necessarily would be reflected in our implementing agencies.
Sure. Jeremy?
I was gonna say, based on what Emmett said, it might be good for the representing commissioners to appear along with council staff in those meetings to ensure that there's multiple paths for those comments to return to the commission.
Sure.
Sue? Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the concerns that a number of us on CDC have had as it relates to comprehensive plans in general, but it would apply here as well for the regional parks policy planning, is the capacity that the various agencies have from a staffing standpoint. I have a district with, I think I've got this right, 12 cities and 2 townships. And I don't want to count right now, but I've got several that have very tiny staffs. And so for them, the planning process is quite a load to carry. And so one of the gaps that I always wonder about is, are we coming up with a process And are we offering resources to those smaller entities to help them do their work in a meaningful way without making it burdensome?
Are there like pieces that they could sort of either offload to the council in a
Right.
central place,
Right.
or at least give them kind of more of a built-out framework?
Right. Right.
Sure. Anyone else? I heard a few pieces I'm gonna attempt to solidify. So part of what we run into here is we talk about what should the regional park system be? And if you take that on its own, you want it to be everything. And that's of course not possible. So part of it is trying to figure out how do we fit into other things? What is our scope so that we can figure out how to do our scope better in conjunction with other things. Part of that is when we're talking about our implementing agencies, they're in kind of an awkward spot of being the implementing agencies of regional parks as well as non-regional parks and trails. And the same thing happens in the Greater Minnesota Regional Parks Commission. Their park and trail units are done mostly by counties, in a couple of instances by regional rail authorities and things like that. And they also have some units that are regional and some that are not. And I'm thinking we could do probably a better job of figuring out what the place of regional parks is in the broader context of all parks and trails everywhere. So if I can just volunteer staff to go have a bunch of meetings with a whole bunch of people, I was just jotting down a list of like everyone that does any sort of park and open space and trail thing in the state. We've got ourselves and the Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission that did not exist 20 years ago or 50 years ago when we started this. And I'm wondering if we could do a better job of coordinating with them to have a relatively cohesive understanding about what regional parks means in Minnesota, whether in the metro or not. Obviously, the DNR and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and National Park Service on the higher level entities, and then below the Association of Minnesota Counties and League of Minnesota Cities. Can we get everybody roughly on the same page on what's a regional park, what's a local county or municipal park, what's a state or national park, and how do those, which things have the same values and which have different values, same roles, different roles, and can we then use that to kind of guide how do we do our part better? Because I know we kind of ride that weird middle ground where we'd like everybody to be happy, but the reality is we're probably more doing our job right if everybody's a little bit upset with us. When we talk about there was the one mentioning the balance of built out areas and natural areas. And yeah, we're not super developed and we're not super wild. We're somewhere in that weird awkward in between. And being in the middle is kind of hard like that. And I think if we can reach out to some of these other groups, maybe we can get to a better place of understanding that. And that also ties in, I think, with the funding thing. Part of the thing that I see as a huge opportunity with this Greater Minnesota Commission is that we don't have to go to the legislature and face what the reality is politically right now is there's a lot of people that are taking a metro versus outstate look in politics. And we want to take it as everybody dealing with parks and trails. So if we can go, when we're talking about getting more funding, especially for the O&M, that the legislature has never stepped up to their commitment for, that they made years and years ago, but also in terms of better bonding capacity and just general better support. If we can go with a unified ask with the Greater Minnesota Commission and say, hey, we have these needs across the entire state, maybe we'll be more successful than if it's just the Met Council and the Metro Area Regional Park Commission wants this. So I'm hoping that maybe from a funding and political standpoint, going more statewide and getting a little out of our silo might position us a little bit better, in addition to just our policy thing of trying to get a more cohesive policy definition of what we are and what we're supposed to be doing and how can we set up some best practices of what that looks like. There was another piece of that too that I lost. But that's an idea. Anyone else? Do you have any more specific questions for us? Am I seeing half a hand, Sue? What is it? Okay, I'm seeing like the finger and I don't know.
No.
Yes, Emmett.
I'll just say this was really our entree into this conversation, and so we are gonna be coming back to you with more specifics around the different aspects of this planning effort. So we're gonna talk to you about a whole host of things, recreation activities and facilities, what is the appropriate balance between conservation and recreation. We're gonna get into these conversations, so take a deep breath and we will get there.
Mr. Chairman.
If someone were to say, have a red line version of the policy plan, to whom would they share that?
Yeah, right to Colin and but to me too.
Just as, a hypothetical.
Fictitiously thinking,
Fictitious,
yes.
non-existent red line
Yeah.
document.
Bring it
with
on,
comments,
Jeremy,
yeah.
yeah.
I'd love to see it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Intense.
no, that's great, and that's actually how we
Yeah.
think about it too.
Good.
I did also notice that there were a couple of sort of third rail things in there. In particular, a few people brought up the possibility of revising formulas.
I saw that too.
And that is very interesting, and also, some of that's in policy plan, some of that's in statute, so I don't know how that will go, but some of the points on there, make a lot of sense to me. In particular, there was one that called out, should we be changing how we balance the funding based on needs versus what's current? And then that also ties into the concerns about ongoing maintenance cost and, whether things are meeting regional need and all of that. And it seems like, yes, some of the way we do funding tends to be the places that already have stuff get more, the places that don't because they don't have the usage to get it. And that might tie into some of our equity discussions. And, this is what it was. On your early slide, when you talked about population growth estimates. One of the things that we have not done a whole lot of historically is talk about how population relates to our siting of resources. Just because of the reality of our system, we tended to build out parks and trails where there was land available. And so there's a bunch of nice big parks around the edge of the region, and there's some very popular ones in the middle. And we have in the individual master plans talk about the service areas and who they're serving and things like that. I'd be curious to know where our gaps are in okay, there's a park here and a bunch of people around it, so we're serving that. And there's a park out here. Are there places where there's a significant number of people that aren't within a service area of a park or trail? Also, of our kind of urban core parks, are we concerned at all about how popular they are? Are they getting overrun or are they within their capacity? And within North Mississippi was the classic example of struggling to build out a park in a place that was underserved. Do we have other ones like that we need to highlight there's not land available around here and we don't know how we're gonna do this, but there's a spot that has a problem. Can we get anything from our population estimates combined with our service area lines to figure out how does what we have and how we have it planned map up to what people exist now and how population growth is anticipated? Which, none of that's easy to solve, but it'd be good to at least know. Bob?
Another point, if I may, Mr. Chair. Colin, as I look at these inputs from our group and the implementing agencies, it would be interesting, because you're closest to it, to know where is there synergy, where is there some commonality of kind of agreement of focus, and where are things that are significantly different that we really ought to be paying attention to in terms of learning from that input. Say, hey, here's what the people on the ground closest to the action are saying. We ought to be taking a look at that value for those visions and seeing how we might address those. I'd like to hear that.
Excellent point. Yeah, and we sort of started down that path this evening. You and we could probably see and hear some of the ways that implementing agencies and MPOSC commissioners have responded to some of these questions. Clearly there's interest in and focus into areas like equity and welcoming spaces and access and inclusion and a number of other topics. But that's just sort of the tip of the iceberg. We intend to take what we've heard here from you, what we've heard from implementing agencies, what we as Council Park staff have put together as some of these same issues, topics, and challenges, along with some other key inputs like our Community Development Committee to really be defining where we focus some attention and effort, particularly at the beginning of the project and update process, acknowledging that we'll be updating the policy plan in its entirety regardless, but I think it makes good sense to be focusing in on the areas that have consistently come up from these key stakeholder and partner groups as we launch this process. So it's a great point, Commissioner, and I also think it's interesting to look at how that input diverges as well, to see how those different groups may have different needs.
Okay. Anyone else? All right, we'll be hearing from you again several other times, I'm sure.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. That wraps that up and moves us on to the reports portion of our meeting. I have just a couple things wanted to keep in mind is that some of you have your terms ending soon. So the council will be proceeding with posting those while you are not guaranteed your current spot again. If you are interested in continuing, certainly you should apply. In particular though, if you are not planning on reapplying, it'd be good to hear that from you so that we know whether we need to make a particular effort to try to reach out and find some applicants in any particular districts. We'll probably get multiple applicants in every district, but if there's any that we know we need to focus on recruitment, that would be good to know about sooner rather than later. Typically, those postings go up in November, so that's coming up real soon.
Do you have a list, Tony, of who's up?
We had a mental list that we thought was accurate. Have you had a chance to check it?
I'll send it out after the meeting to
Want to
everyone.
verify?
I think I'm upset.
So
you're
Jeremy
probably
and
up
you,
too.
yeah, Todd, Kemery.
We believe that's correct, yeah. So that will
And
be.
Anthony.
So it opens in November and interviews are January?
We don't have that kind of stuff scheduled. We've typically done interviews in like the January timeframe, but it really depends on kind of what happens with some staff availability things. So
What happens with the governor's election?
that too, because it does also get kind of thrown off. If the governor changes, then there's the opportunity for several of the council members to change. And ultimately, our positions are all appointed by the council. So if it's going to be the same council, we can do things relatively quickly. If we have to wait for a whole new council to get appointed, then our time to when we can actually seat new people gets pushed out by quite a ways. So that depends.
Because it's,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, because it's a redistricting year, I've been told, actually, I think I was sitting right there when I was told this. I thought I was gonna be done on December 31st, and I found out that because of redistricting, the council won't be replaced or reappointed, and all of us are up for reappointment until possibly late spring, early summer, depending on what happens with the legislature.
Yeah.
And just as a point of information, those of us that are currently serving on the council, although we were appointed by the governor, our appointments were never confirmed by the state senate, because they just never got to it.
Right.
But
So there's
it
some
tells you-
moving
yeah.
pieces. We don't know.
Yeah, but we could be around for a long time, so you probably wouldn't have to wait as long with your.
Well, and that's the
There's
other
some
thing is.
good news today, huh?
If you are planning, if your term is expiring and you're not planning on sticking around, also let us know whether you are or are not available to serve out until a replacement is named, or if you're only available through the end of your stated term. Because if we're gonna have quorum problems in February, March, April, we would definitely like to know that as well. So certainly if you're able to stick around until any replacement is named, that helps us immensely, because otherwise quorum gets real interesting. The other thing is I am going to be out of town next month for a dog thing, so I'm going to have to miss a meeting. And so I will be leaving you in Cecily's capable hands as our vice chair to run that one.
Be nice, everybody.
Yeah. You know, don't bring up any super obscure Robert's Rules things on her, right?
Actually, I do know Robert's rules
Do you?
pretty well.
All right, you're probably better off than most people then. Find something else obscure to hit her with then instead. You know, I was trying to be nice, but then she goes and breaks me. Yeah, I'm gonna look more into this consent agenda idea, because that sounds like it could be real interesting for some of our things. And I think that's about it. So that's it for me. Any other commissioner reports? Okay, liaison report? Staff?
I just want to report that Bob and I went to the Lake Waconia Service Center groundbreaking out in Carver County, and it was excellent. It's exciting, right on the shores of Lake Waconia. This is something that we have reviewed in plans as well as funded. So it was a great event. The legislative session, that's still happening. We are preparing. It's a biennial budgeting year. I've said this before, and we'll keep you posted. But that is another role and opportunity for you folks to meet with your legislators and talk to them about regional park system funding. So there's an opportunity for all of us to grow and explore.
And in addition to funding, one something that Jeremy and Emmett and I were discussing a little bit before we convened is we might have some asks for the legislature about open meeting law tweaks. Some things came up during the pandemic where we just realized, I wonder if there's a way to change that at all. So we might have some asks for them on that too.
And legacy renewal.
Yep.
Yes, that's an ask of everybody that we need to coordinate somehow.
So Tony, what do you mean by open meeting?
So we've had questions about whether we could, for instance, do hybrid where some people are here and some are at home or not. I don't.
It's awful.
It's difficult, certainly. But we've also had a question about even just all hybrid in a non-emergency state. We've had some meetings we've canceled in the past because of snowstorms, things like that. Like, would it be possible to still hold those meetings? Just generally looking at, are there things that we would prefer or not prefer to have more flexible in there? It gets awkward because we are not considered an agency or board under state law. So there's some things that other people are able to do that council and MPOSC are not. And it might be nice if we could get wrapped in, at least with those, even if we don't end up using them, just having some other options could occasionally be useful.
I think the idea of having the option for either hybrid or under emergency situations being able to do online versus or Zoom versus in place is a good idea. So I vote yay.
Yeah, it's an interesting ask. But I definitely know what you mean when you say hybrid is hard, because in a work environment, it's a nightmare.
I'm seeing it fail in nonprofits, in other agencies.
The main thing.
Balancing sort of the equity
Yeah.
of people being there and not being there and how to get feedback from everyone. It's one thing if you're all online or it's one thing if you're all in person.
Yeah. I'd say the big thing about it is it mostly rests on the chair to get that right. So if we did end up going that way, you could all blame me if I get it wrong. So I'll throw that out there.
I remember that.
Yeah. All right. So I think, is that all then?
Yes.
Okay. Then with that, we are ready to adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Does anyone